Selenai had always considered humans quaint. They were an industrious species, certainly, with a stubborn refusal to perish despite their fragility. Their ability to endure harsh environments made them useful, though it was difficult to see them as anything more than that, useful tools, much like the massive drills they operated in the orange crust of Delphos 4. She had come to this forsaken colony world to inspect mining operations for the consortium, which controlled trade and resource extraction across the Cygnus Verge. As a highborn of the Aelathari Dominion, her word carried authority. It was her duty to ensure that the humans remained efficient and compliant. The heat in the mining tunnels was unbearable. Though her body had been genetically engineered for perfection, her sapphire skin unblemished, her tall, willowy form naturally resistant to most environmental hazards, she still detested the filth clinging to every surface. The stench of unwashed human laborers made her wrinkle her nose in disgust. Her personal guard, Ralzek, walked at her side, his plasma rifle slung across his chest. Like her, he was Aelathari, genetically superior, his emerald green skin and glowing silver eyes marking his rank as an elite warrior. He was here not to protect her from wild animals or collapsing tunnels, but from them. The humans. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Your Highness, if you'd kindly stay close," said the human leading their tour. A thick-set, scruffy man in a dust-covered jumpsuit. His voice was rough, his accent coarse. His name was Jack Calloway, and he was the senior foreman of Mining Operation Theta 7. Selenai barely acknowledged him. "Proceed." Jack sighed. He hated dealing with the Aelathari, but he wasn't paid to argue. He was paid to dig. He adjusted his helmet, brushing a gloved hand across his beard. Unlike the other miners, who tiptoed around their alien overlords, Jack didn't bother hiding his disdain. He knew how the Aelathari saw them. Like insects, barely worth the oxygen they breathed. "All right," he muttered. "We're currently in Shaft 17, about 2 kilometers down. This vein is rich in xantharite, stuff your people love for ship hulls. We pulled out about 20 tons last week alone." Selenai folded her arms. "And yet your quotas remain unmet. Why?" Jack exhaled through his nose. "Because, lady, the deeper we dig, the worse the conditions get. The rock is unstable. You want us to pick up the pace? Then expect more cave-ins." "Unacceptable." Jack shot her a look. "We are doing the best we can. Unless your superior species can magically hold up 3,000 tons of rock, we're working as fast as humanly possible." Ralzek took a step forward, his rifle humming as he powered it up. Jack barely spared him a glance. Selenai raised a hand. "Let him be." Jack smirked. "First time you've ever had to deal with someone who won't grovel, huh?" Before Selenai could deliver some cold, noble response, a deep rumble rolled through the tunnel. Jack stiffened. Shit. The ground lurched. Then came the sound, like distant thunder, but deeper. It rattled their bones. Jack didn't think. He grabbed Selenai by the arm and yanked her back just as the tunnel ceiling gave way. The world erupted into dust, rock, and darkness. For the first time in her life, Selenai experienced terror. The darkness was absolute. The dust choked her lungs, her usually pristine uniform torn and coated in filth. She tried to stand but found herself pinned beneath a slab of rock. She struggled, but the weight was too much. A hand gripped her shoulder. "Stay still," Jack's voice came from somewhere beside her. "You're lucky. That thing just clipped your leg. Hold on." There was the sound of metal scraping against stone. Sparks flickered in the darkness as Jack used his plasma cutter to slice through the rock, pinning her down. "Can you move?" he asked. Selenai gritted her teeth, willing herself to ignore the sharp pain in her leg. I believe so." "Good." Jack grabbed her under the arms and hauled her up. She felt an indignity she had never known before. A human touching her, supporting her. But there was no time to argue. Dim emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows over the collapsed tunnel. The path they had come from was completely sealed. Ralzek, the guards, the rest of the miners. Gone. Jack exhaled sharply. "All right. Looks like it's just you and me, Your Highness." Selenai swallowed, her aristocratic poise cracking. "Then I suggest you find a way to get us out." Jack gave her a look. Oh, sure. Let me just whip out my magic wand and teleport us to safety. Are you always this insubordinate? Only when I'm buried under a mountain of rock with a bossy alien princess. Selenai glared. I am not a... Jack raised a hand. Shoo. She fell silent. Jack pressed his ear to the rubble, listening. The walls groaned. The rock was still shifting. That meant they didn't have much time before another collapse. Jack reached for his communicator. Theta 7, this is Calloway. We've got a major cave-in in Shaft 17. Survivors unknown. Do you copy? Static. He cursed under his breath. The collapse must have taken out the signal relays. Selenai took a deep breath, composing herself. You seem to have experience with this situation. Jack shrugged. I've been in a few cave-ins before. The trick is staying calm and figuring out a way up. He pulled out his handheld scanner and activated it. The small device beeped as it mapped the tunnel around them. After a moment, he pointed at the leftmost wall. There, he said. Behind this rockfall, there's an old service tunnel. If we can dig through, we might be able to reach the surface. Selenai regarded him carefully. You seem resourceful. Jack smirked. Yeah? And you seem less insufferable when you're scared out of your mind. Selenai's eyes narrowed. Primitive. Jack just grinned. Come on, princess. Let's get out of here before the ceiling decides to crush us flat. And so, side by side, the aristocratic alien and the gruff miner began their long, perilous climb toward survival. The flickering emergency lights barely pierced the thick dust in the air. Jack adjusted his grip on his plasma cutter, glancing at Selenai. You gonna stand there looking pretty? Or are you actually gonna help? Selenai gave him a withering look. You expect me to? Yeah, Jack interrupted, already activating the cutter. Unless you'd rather sit there and wait for another cave-in. She bristled. The Aelithari were bred for intelligence, strategy, and governance, not manual labor. Yet here she was, trapped under tons of rock, dependent on a human to survive. She hated it, but she hated the idea of dying more. Without another word, she knelt beside him, trying not to breathe in too much dust. Jack smirked. That's the spirit. The plasma cutter hissed as he sliced through a massive slab of stone, the air filled with the acrid scent of burning minerals. Selenai reached for a smaller piece, intending to push it aside, but the moment she put weight on her injured leg, pain flared up like fire. She gasped, nearly toppling over. Jack caught her. Whoa, easy there, he said, steadying her with surprising gentleness. That leg's not gonna hold up if you keep pushing it. She clenched her jaw, hating her own weakness. I will manage. Jack sighed. Stubborn. Figures. He ripped a strip of cloth from his sleeve and knelt beside her. What are you doing? She demanded. Unless you want that leg getting worse, I'm wrapping it. Selenai stiffened as Jack's rough, calloused hands worked quickly, binding the makeshift bandage around her calf. She could feel the heat of him, the scent of sweat and stone dust mingling with the sterility of her Aelithari uniform. She had never been this close to a human before. Their kind was always kept at a respectful distance, treated as lesser beings. Yet here he was, tending to her wound as if they were equals. It was unsettling. There, Jack said, tying the bandage tight. That should hold for now. Try not to put too much weight on it. She exhaled slowly, nodding. Thank you. Jack raised an eyebrow. Did a highborn just thank me? Do not make me regret it. Jack chuckled. Fair enough. Now, let's get moving. Clearing the debris took time. The deeper they went, the hotter the air became. Their breathing grew labored, sweat glistening on their skin. Jack's scanner beeped, mapping the tunnel ahead. Good news, he said. We're close to the service tunnel. And the bad news? Jack hesitated. The scanner's picking up something else. Selenai frowned. Something else? Jack tapped the screen. See this? He pointed at the glowing shapes. There's a void just beyond this wall. A chamber, bigger than a standard tunnel. And, I don't know, but something's moving in there. Selenai's eyes narrowed. That is impossible. These mines were deemed uninhabited. Yeah, well, maybe your fancy Dominion scanners missed something. Selenai didn't like the sound of that. She had read every geological report before arriving on Delphos 4. There was no record of any life forms below the surface. So what the hell was moving in there? Jack sighed. Guess we're about to find out. He braced himself and sliced through the last rock barrier. The wall crumbled away, revealing an opening into darkness. Jack lifted his wrist light, shining it inside. And then he froze. The chamber stretched beyond what their lights could reach, its walls glistening like obsidian, smooth and unnatural. And then there were the bones. Scattered across the cavern floor were dozens of skeletons, some human, some unrecognizable, their remains fused with the rock as if something had grown over them. Selenai's breath hitched. This should not be here. Jack stepped forward cautiously, scanning the ground. The bones were ancient, but there was something else, something fresher. A deep, guttural clicking echoed from the shadows. Jack's blood ran cold. We need to move. Now. Selenai turned to him. What did you hear? Another click, click, click. Then came the skittering. Something was coming. Jack grabbed Selenai's wrist and pulled her toward the exit. Run. She didn't argue. The ground trembled beneath them as something massive shifted in the darkness. They barely made it through the tunnel before the sound of chitin scraping against rock filled the air. Jack turned, sealing the entrance behind them with his plasma cutter. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, from the other side of the rock wall, a long, slow scratch. Selenai exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. What was that? Jack wiped sweat from his brow, his expression grim. Something that ain't been hungry in a long time. They moved fast. Jack's scanner still pointed the way to the service tunnel, but now he was checking behind them every few seconds. He didn't like the way the rocks had shifted, the way the air felt wrong, as if something ancient had just woken up. Selenai limped beside him, her expression unreadable. You knew, she said finally. Jack glanced at her. Knew what? You suspected something was down here. That is why you were nervous. Jack exhaled. I heard rumors. A few miners went missing over the years. Nothing official, of course. Your Dominion overlords don't like bad press. Selenai's jaw tightened. And you said nothing? You wouldn't have believed me. She wanted to argue, to tell him that the Aelithari did not ignore threats. But the truth was, she had ignored him. She had dismissed every concern he had voiced. And now they were running for their lives. The scanner beeped again. There, Jack pointed ahead. That's the access tunnel. If we can make it through. The tunnel collapsed. A deafening roar of stone and dust erupted as the ceiling caved in, cutting off their path. Jack cursed. Shit, SHIT. Selenai's heart pounded. Is there another route? Jack checked the scanner. The display flickered, then died. Damn it. He slammed it against the wall, but it was useless. They were trapped. Selenai turned back the way they had come. The scratching sound had returned. Only now, it was closer. Jack clenched his jaw. Well, princess, looks like we either find another way out. A sharp hiss came from the shadows. Selenai swallowed. Or we make our last stand. Jack pulled his sidearm, checking the charge. He smirked. You ever used a gun before? Selenai's glowing silver eyes met his. Not on primitive creatures. Jack chuckled, tossing her a spare weapon. Then you're about to get real familiar with one. The shadows moved, and the hunt began. The air in the collapsed tunnel was thick with dust, the oppressive darkness pressing in like a living thing. Jack adjusted his grip on the plasma pistol, his finger resting just outside the trigger guard. Selenai stood beside him, her stance rigid but controlled. Though she had never wielded such crude human weaponry before, she held it with surprising ease, her long, slender fingers curling around the grip with the practiced confidence of someone bred for precision. The scratching in the darkness grew louder. Then came the clicking. Jack's pulse quickened. He knew that sound. Predators. Large ones. And they weren't scurrying away. They were closing in. We need light, Jack muttered. Selenai gestured to her wrist device, activating a soft bioluminescent glow. The faint blue light spread out in a circular radius, barely illuminating the jagged tunnel walls. It was enough. The first shape emerged from the darkness. Jack's breath hitched. The creature was massive, its elongated, insectoid body covered in thick, glistening exoskeletal plates. Spindly, multi-jointed limbs extended from its torso, each ending in razor-sharp talons that scraped against the stone floor. Its head was the worst of all, a long, segmented maw split open in multiple directions, lined with rows of needle-like teeth. It wasn't alone. More of them crept forward from the tunnel depths, their black carapaces reflecting the dim light. Selenai inhaled sharply, her voice cold and composed. Those are not recorded in any Dominion databases. Jack gave a humorless chuckle. Yeah, no shit. One of the creatures lunged. Jack fired. A bolt of plasma seared through the air, hitting the creature square in the chest. The impact sent it reeling, a shriek like tearing metal echoing through the cavern. But it didn't fall. The wound in its chest sealed itself almost instantly. Jack's stomach dropped. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Selenai fired next. Her shot was more precise, aimed directly at the creature's eye cluster. The plasma burned through its skull, and this time, the thing screeched and collapsed, twitching violently before going still. Jack blinked. All right. Weak point confirmed. The other creatures rushed them. Selenai fired again, dropping another. Jack took aim, forcing himself to remain calm as he waited for the right shot. The creatures were fast, their limbs moving in erratic, unpredictable patterns. He squeezed the trigger. Another headshot. Another kill. But more kept coming. They were being herded. Jack grabbed Selenai's arm, pulling her backward. We can't win this fight. We need to move. Selenai nodded sharply, already scanning their surroundings. The collapsed tunnel blocked their path to the surface, and the only way out was. Her heart sank. Jack, she said. He glanced at her, still firing. What? She pointed to the only open passage, the one leading deeper into the tunnels. Jack grimaced. Ah, hell. A fresh wave of creatures burst forward. They had no choice. Go! Jack shouted. They ran. Chapter 7. Into the Abyss. The tunnels narrowed as they descended, forcing them into single file. Jack led the way, plasma pistol clenched in one hand, his scanner, now partially working, gripped in the other. Selenai followed, moving with surprising agility despite her injured leg. She barely made a sound, her alien grace allowing her to flow through the rocky terrain like a phantom. The creatures weren't far behind. Their rapid skittering echoed from all directions, their inhuman clicks forming an eerie, unbroken rhythm. Jack gritted his teeth. I don't suppose you've got a Dominion warship on standby? Selenai didn't answer. Her attention was locked on the tunnel walls, her glowing silver eyes scanning the markings. Jack noticed. Something you want to share? Selenai ran her fingers over the strange carvings etched into the rock, patterns that shouldn't exist in a natural cave system. She exhaled. These tunnels are not natural. Jack swore. You're telling me something built them? Selenai nodded. And whoever, or whatever, did so was not human. Before Jack could respond, the ground beneath them shifted. A deep, guttural rumble shook the tunnel. Rocks cracked from the ceiling, dust billowing around them. And then, suddenly, the floor collapsed. Jack barely had time to curse before they plummeted into the void. Jack hit the ground hard, pain exploding through his shoulder as he tumbled across the cold stone floor. Selenai landed more gracefully, rolling into a crouch. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then they looked up, and what they saw stole their breath. They had fallen into an enormous cavern, far larger than any natural formation should be. Towering structures loomed in the darkness, their angular forms illuminated by the faint glow of bioluminescent veins running through the walls. The buildings were ancient, their surfaces covered in the same intricate markings Selenai had noticed before. Jack exhaled slowly. Holy shit. Selenai stood, her gaze filled with something Jack had never seen in her before. This is impossible, she murmured. The Dominion has mapped this world extensively. There was no record of. She stopped, because she had just realized something. The buildings, they weren't abandoned. Jack followed her gaze. His blood turned to ice. Silhouettes stood along the ledges. Tall, motionless figures, their forms wrapped in shadow. They had been watching them the whole time. Jack swallowed. Selenai. She didn't move. Yeah, she whispered. Tell me your people didn't just wake something up? A deep, reverberating chime echoed through the cavern. The figures moved. Jack raised his pistol. Ah, hell. And then, from the tunnel above, the creatures poured in. Trapped between the ancient unknown and the monstrous pursuit behind them, Jack and Selenai had nowhere left to run. Jack's grip on his pistol tightened. His mind raced, trying to calculate their options, but the stark reality was inescapable. They were surrounded. The creatures from the tunnels slithered down the cavern walls, their black exoskeletons gleaming in the eerie bioluminescent glow. Their clicking and chittering formed an unnatural chorus, a hunter's song echoing in the vast emptiness. And then there were the figures. They stood along the towering structures, watching in absolute silence. They weren't moving toward Jack and Selenai. Not yet. But their presence was oppressive, like ancient sentinels waiting for something. Jack had survived a lot of bad situations in his life, but this was new. All right, princess, he muttered. Any chance those guys up there are friendly? Selenai didn't respond immediately. Her silver eyes flickered as she analyzed the architecture, the markings, the stillness of the watchers. There was something familiar about it all. And then she realized. Jack, she whispered. Yeah. Do not move. Jack's jaw tightened. You're gonna have to give me a damn good reason for that. Selenai exhaled. Because if we are where I think we are, we have just trespassed on the ruins of the first architects. Jack blinked. That's supposed to mean something to me? Selenai turned her gaze toward him, and for the first time, Jack saw fear in her eyes. They were here before the Dominion, before humanity, before anything in this sector of space. No one knows what happened to them. Jack glanced at the watchers, then at the horde of chittering horrors still approaching. Well, I'm guessing they didn't move out peacefully. A deep, reverberating tone filled the cavern. It wasn't sound. It was vibration, pulsing through the stone, through the air, through them. The watchers moved. Not walking, gliding. Their forms flickered, their elongated bodies shifting between solid and incorporeal states. Their faces, or what passed for them, remained veiled in shadow, unreadable and ancient. Selenai inhaled sharply. They are waking up? Jack was about to ask what the hell that meant when the creatures behind them attacked. The first wave lunged. Jack fired. His plasma bolt hit true, searing through a creature's elongated skull. It shrieked and fell, but two more took its place. Selenai moved with precision, her own shots cutting through the darkness with deadly accuracy. But it wasn't enough. The creatures were relentless. Jack cursed. We're not making it out of this one. And then, the watchers struck. They didn't move like living things. They flickered from their ledges, reappearing amidst the creatures. And when they did, everything changed. The skittering horrors screamed, their bodies convulsing, their limbs dissolving as if reality itself was rejecting them. The watchers extended their hands, long, shimmering appendages that phased through flesh, tearing something unseen from the creatures' bodies. Jack could only watch as the monstrosities withered, their forms breaking apart into nothingness. The cavern filled with their dying shrieks. And then, silence. The air was thick with tension. Jack's heart was still hammering against his ribs. He turned slowly, his weapon still raised. The watchers stood motionless. Then, one of them spoke, not in words, but in thought. Jack felt it more than heard it, an ancient presence pressing against his mind. You do not belong. Jack clenched his teeth, sweat running down his temple. Yeah, believe me, we know that. We're just trying to get out of here. The watcher's presence pressed harder. You awakened the hunger. Selenai stepped forward, ignoring the pain in her leg. If we disturbed this place, it was not intentional. We seek only passage. The watcher turned to her. You are of the false ones. Selenai stiffened. What? The air grew cold. Jack's gut twisted. What the hell does that mean? The watcher moved. It flickered forward, one moment distant, the next standing directly in front of Selenai. Jack raised his gun. Back the hell up. Selenai didn't move, But Jack saw the tension in her body, the way her fingers curled slightly, as if preparing to strike. The Watcher's hand hovered inches from her chest. The false ones took what was ours, shaped themselves from us, claimed this stone as their domain. Jack's pulse pounded. Selenai, he said carefully, what the hell is it talking about? Selenai didn't answer, because the implication was sinking in. The Eilithari Dominion, her people, her entire species, had long believed they were the pinnacle of genetic engineering, the perfect form, evolved beyond weakness. But this Watcher, this ancient, forgotten being, was suggesting something else, that the Eilithari were not the masters of creation. They were the descendants of thieves. Jack saw the subtle shift in her posture, the tightening of her jaw. She didn't want to believe it. Neither did he, because if the Watchers were telling the truth, then everything the Dominion knew about their own history was a lie. A second Watcher stepped forward. Its presence in Jack's mind was like an echo of the first, ancient, cold, unyielding. Judgment comes. The cavern shook. The bioluminescent veins along the walls flared to life, pulsing with something deep beneath the surface. The very foundation of the ancient city seemed to breathe. Jack's grip tightened on his gun. I really don't like the sound of that. Selenai's voice was barely above a whisper. They are not just sentinels. They are the last remnants of something greater. Jack exhaled. And something tells me they're about to finish what was started a long time ago. Above them, the ceiling cracked, and something else began to stir. Jack looked at Selenai. Whatever happens next, you with me? She met his gaze. There was no hesitation. Until the end. And as the first titanic shape began to emerge from the abyss, Jack had the distinct feeling that the end was coming a lot sooner than either of them had hoped. The cavern trembled. Jack barely had time to register the sheer size of the thing emerging from the abyss before instinct took over. He grabbed Selenai's wrist and ran. Behind them, the Watchers stood unmoving, their elongated forms flickering in and out of existence like specters trapped between dimensions. But their presence, their will, was everywhere. And above, from the cracked ceiling of the cavern, something vast was waking up. Selenai's mind raced. The Watchers had called it the hunger, but what did that mean? A predator? A force? A remnant of something far older than even the Dominion? Jack was thinking something far simpler. If it's waking up, it means it was asleep. If it was asleep, it means somebody put it down before. And if somebody put it down before, there was a way to do it again. He just needed to find it before the damn thing killed them all. The air turned heavy, not just physically, but something deeper. An oppressive force pressing down on their bones, their thoughts. Jack stumbled, nearly losing his footing. He gritted his teeth. The hell is this? Selenai inhaled sharply. A containment field, or what remains of one. Jack glanced up. Through the thick haze of dust and bioluminescent mist, he could barely make out the vast silhouette rising above the ruins. It wasn't just big. It was wrong. The shape had no single form, constantly shifting. Tentacles unraveled from the dark mass, then disappeared, reforming into jagged protrusions that resembled bones. Its head, if it had one, split into shifting layers of mandibles, void-like eyes flickering open and shut as if reality itself struggled to define its existence. It was like the universe had tried to erase it once, and now it was remembering it was supposed to exist. Jack pulled his gun, but deep down, he knew it was laughable. Yeah, I don't think shooting that is gonna do much, he muttered. Selenai's voice was tight. No, but something once imprisoned it here. Jack exhaled. Then we find out how, and do it again. The Watchers moved. Not with panic. Not with urgency. With purpose. They raised their hands toward the abyssal entity, and suddenly, the cavern was filled with sound. Not a voice, not language, but a deep, resonant frequency that shook the bones of the world itself. The entity froze. Jack's eyes widened. It's working. Selenai, however, was not so sure. The creature twisted, its form bending in ways that defied physics. And then, it screamed. A shockwave erupted from its shifting mass, shattering the closest ruins, sending Jack and Selenai flying. The watchers closest to it blinked out of existence, their flickering forms unable to withstand the force. Jack slammed into a stone pillar, the impact nearly knocking the breath from his lungs. His vision swam. Selenai landed beside him, but she did not move. Jack's heart lurched. "Hey!" He grabbed her shoulder, shaking her. "Stay with me, princess." She stirred, groaning. I am here." Jack exhaled. "Good. 'Cause we're not dying yet." Selenai forced herself to her feet. The watchers, they were not attacking it. Jack frowned. "What?" She steadied herself, breathing heavily. They were trying to seal it again. Jack's stomach dropped, and it just killed half of them. Another deep boom echoed as the hunger pulled itself fully into the cavern. The ruins crumbled. The bioluminescent veins in the walls dimmed, as if the planet itself was afraid. Jack tightened his grip on his gun, even though it was useless. "Got a plan, princess?" Selenai's silver eyes flickered. "Yes, but you are not going to like it." Jack snorted. "If it ends with me still breathing, I'll take it." Selenai's fingers brushed the markings on the stone pillar beside her. "We need to activate the original containment field." Jack stared at her. "You know how?" She hesitated. Jack groaned. "Oh, fantastic." Selenai shot him a look. "If you have a better idea, I am listening." Jack sighed. "Nope. Just hoping for once we had one solid plan instead of wing it and hope we don't die." Selenai turned toward the ruins, scanning the structures. "If we find the control nexus, we can force the field to reactivate." Jack narrowed his eyes. "And what happens if it doesn't work?" Selenai didn't look at him. Jack exhaled. "Yeah, figured." The hunger shifted. Its formless mass shuddered, void-like eyes turning toward them. Jack grabbed Selenai's wrist. "Then we'd better move fast." They ran. The ruins were not empty. As Jack and Selenai weaved between the ancient structures, things stirred in the darkness, twisted remnants of what the hunger had already consumed. Once living beings, human, Alethari, and unrecognizable forms, shuffled through the crumbling city, their bodies warped and half-formed. Jack cursed. "It doesn't just eat things." Selenai's voice was grim. "It recycles them." One of the malformed creatures lurched forward. Its body was a grotesque fusion of bone, stone, and flesh, as if it had been frozen mid-consumption. A distorted human face was half-formed within its shifting mass, mouth stretched in a silent scream. Jack shot it in the head. It did not die. Instead, it split, the bullet tearing it apart only to reveal more of itself, slithering outward like molten flesh reconfiguring. Jack didn't stop. "Oh, we are so screwed." Selenai pointed ahead. "There. That structure." Jack followed her gaze. A towering monolith stood at the heart of the ruins, its surface untouched by time. "The control nexus," Selenai said. "It must be." Behind them, the hunger's formless appendages twisted toward them, its presence growing stronger with every second. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed Selenai's hand and pulled her forward. They sprinted for the monolith as the sky itself shook, and then the hunger lunged. A tendril of pure, writhing darkness shot toward them, too fast to dodge. Jack shoved Selenai aside, turning to meet the strike head-on. Pain exploded through him as the tendril impaled him through the chest. Selenai screamed. Jack barely registered the sound. He was off the ground, held aloft by the hunger's grasp. His body convulsed, agony searing through every nerve. Selenai did not think. She ran, straight for the monolith. Jack's vision blurred. His pulse slowed. The hunger pulled at him, tearing at his mind. And then, Selenai reached the monolith. She slammed her hand against the ancient console, her voice ringing out in the forgotten tongue of the first architects. The ruins lit up. The hunger screamed, and everything collapsed into white pain. Jack barely registered anything beyond the raw agony coursing through his body. The hunger's tendril had pierced straight through his chest, but the worst part wasn't the physical wound. It was the pulling. He could feel it. Something deep, something worse than death, like his very being was unraveling, as if the hunger wasn't just killing him, but absorbing him. Jack clenched his jaw, forcing his mind to stay together. Not yet. Not like this. And then, the ruins blazed to life. The monolith pulsed with raw energy as Selenai's voice echoed through the cavern, speaking words that had not been uttered for thousands of years. The air vibrated with power, the weight of an ancient command forcing itself upon reality. Jack felt the hunger recoil. The tendril holding him shuddered, twisting in unnatural agony. And then, it let go. Jack hit the ground hard, coughing blood. His vision swam, but he forced himself to look up. The hunger screamed. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't even something Jack could fully comprehend. It was a warping of existence itself, a twisting distortion of reality. The Watchers, what remained of them, moved. They raised their shimmering, elongated hands toward the hunger, their forms flickering like broken images. The seal was reforming. The hunger writhed, fighting. It lashed out, tendrils of darkness thrashing against the walls of the ancient city. But the containment field was closing. Jack could feel it, space itself tightening around the entity, forcing it back into dormancy. Selenai stood at the monolith, her body rigid, her hands pressed against the pulsating control interface. She was the key now. Jack groaned, pushing himself up onto his elbows. Selenai. His voice was weak, ragged. Tell me this thing is gonna hold. Selenai didn't look at him. She was locked in. I do not know, she admitted, her voice strained. But I cannot stop now. Jack's heart pounded. He could see it. The monolith was draining her. It was taking her strength, her life force, using it as the final catalyst to complete the seal. Jack's breath hitched. She wasn't going to survive this. No, not after everything. Not after how far they had come. Jack gritted his teeth, forced himself up, and staggered toward her. His legs barely carried him, but he moved. The hunger was almost gone. But so was she. Selenai's silver eyes were dimming, her form wavering. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed her. Selenai gasped as his hands gripped her arms, pulling her away from the monolith. No, she choked. I must. You're not dying here, princess. Jack shouted. The monolith shuddered. For a single, terrifying moment, Jack thought he had doomed them all. But the Watchers, the last few that remained, took his place. They drifted forward, their translucent bodies merging with the monolith itself, completing what Selenai had started. The seal snapped shut. The hunger let out one last, deafening roar. And then it was gone. The cavern fell silent. The Watchers, too, began to vanish. Their duty, whatever it had once been, was finally over. And as the bioluminescent veins of the city dimmed, Jack let out a ragged breath and collapsed beside Selenai. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Jack chuckled. Weak, breathless, but real. Well, that sucked. Selenai exhaled, barely able to keep her eyes open. Agreed. Jack turned his head toward her, studying her exhausted form. You okay? Selenai gave a faint, tired smile. I am alive. Jack nodded. Yeah, that's a win in my book. The ruins were quiet now. The hunger was sealed, the Watchers gone, and the threat that had nearly ended everything was buried once more. Jack didn't know what came next. Maybe the Dominion would cover this all up. Maybe the truth, that the Aelithari were not the ultimate species, but a civilization built atop forgotten theft, would shake the entire power structure of the galaxy. Maybe none of it mattered, because they had survived. Selenai shifted slightly, looking at him. You saved me, she murmured. Jack smirked. Guess that means I'm not so primitive after all, huh? Selenai hesitated. Then, softly, no, you are not. Jack exhaled, staring up at the cracked cavern ceiling. Think you'll still look at humans the same way after this? Selenai closed her eyes, exhaustion weighing down on her. No, she admitted. Jack chuckled again. Good. They lay there, side by side, beneath the ruins of a forgotten age. Alive, against all odds. And as the last remnants of the ancient city faded into darkness, Jack and Selenai knew. This was only the beginning.